August 1944. The air over Normandy was thick with dust and the sour smell of burnt fuel. Dawn crawled over the fields near St. Lambert-sur-Dives, revealing rows of shattered orchards and the dark silhouettes of wrecked armor scattered along the ridgelines. The battlefield was quiet, too quiet for a place that had been fighting for days. In that stillness, a single American M4 Sherman pushed through the morning fog. Its engine growled softly, almost uncertain, as it crept between the apple trees. Steel tracks pressed into the damp soil, leaving a slow, deliberate trail. The tank looked out of place, small, vulnerable, a lone shape against a landscape torn apart by heavier machines. Up on the ridge, 3 German Panthers waited in silent readiness. Their long 75mm guns pointed toward the valley, like patient hunters. Inside their steel hulls, crews watched the Sherman with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. At this range, the American tank should have been frozen with fear. Instead, it kept moving. For a moment, nobody fired. Nobody spoke. Time felt suspended, because what happened in the next minutes would defy every expectation of German armor superiority, and rewrite what tank crews believed was possible. By the summer of 1944, the war in Western Europe had entered a violent transformation. What had begun as a slow, grinding advance through the hedgerows of Normandy was becoming a rapid unraveling of German defensive lines. After the success of Operation Cobra in late July, American armored divisions finally broke free of the claustrophobic bocage and pushed into open country. The German front, once rigid and confident, now bent under the weight of the Allied advance. The retreat toward the Seine was not strategic, it was desperate. To the east, British and Canadian forces drove hard toward Falaise, while American units pressed from the south. Between them lay the closing jaws of what would become the Falaise Pocket, a vast encirclement threatening nearly 100,000 German troops. Roads clogged with retreating vehicles, shattered columns, and exhausted infantry. Commanders struggled to maintain order as air attacks pounded their every movement. In this collapsing corridor, scattered tank engagements erupted with chaotic unpredictability. Among the armored forces still fighting to delay the Allies were elements of the 2nd Panzer Division and remnants of the elite Panzer Lehr. Though weakened, these units still possessed some of the most formidable tanks of the war. The Panther OSF. With thick sloped armor, a powerful high-velocity 75mm gun, and excellent optics, the Panther was designed for long-range superiority. Even outnumbered, Panther crews carried themselves with a quiet confidence earned from years of combat on the Eastern Front. For the Americans, the advance was carried primarily by M4 Shermans. Versatile, reliable, and available in overwhelming numbers, the Sherman was the backbone of U.S. armored doctrine. But in head-to-head combat, especially at range, its 75mm gun struggled against the Panther's armor. Crews knew this well. Many had already watched Sherman shells bounce off Panther glacis plates like stones striking iron. Inside briefing tents and muddy foxholes, the advice was always the same. Get close, stay mobile, and avoid being caught in the open. Yet the terrain of Normandy rarely offered ideal conditions. The bocage, those ancient hedgerows with earthen embankments up to 10 feet high, forced tanks into narrow lanes and blind corners. Each bend risked exposing a tank's vulnerable frontal arc to an enemy waiting on higher ground. Communication was limited. Lines of sight were constantly broken. A single misplaced turn could lead straight into an ambush. As the encirclement tightened in mid-August, American armored units spread across the countryside near St. Lambert-sur-Dives to seal the escape routes. Small villages became strongpoints. Farm roads turned into battlegrounds marked with burning half-tracks and abandoned wagons. Every intersection mattered. Every hill mattered. It was a landscape where luck, instinct, and seconds counted as much as armor thickness. German Panthers used the terrain skillfully. Their crews preferred ridgelines, with a long barrel of their KWK-42 cannon could dominate entire valleys. From elevated positions, they could engage targets long before the enemy even identified them. To the Americans below, each ridgeline carried the same unspoken threat. If a Panther was there, it would almost certainly fire first. Despite mounting losses, the Germans fought with professional discipline. Orders from higher command demanded that armored units delay the American advance at all costs to allow infantry to escape eastward. Many Panther crews were young but technically skilled, trained under increasingly intense programs that emphasized precision, gunnery, and defensive tactics. Even a handful of Panthers could disrupt an Allied column if positioned correctly. Meanwhile, American crews operated under a different philosophy: speed, coordination, and overwhelming force. The Sherman's faster turret traverse, reliable engine, and ease of repair made it a maneuvering platform rather than a dueling one. Crews relied on teamwork, constant movement, and the belief that closing distance neutralized the Panther's advantage. Veterans often said the same simple phrase: keep the tank alive by never staying still. In the days leading to the encounter that would later push German crews to stunned silence, American reconnaissance patrols moved through the mist-covered orchards near the Dives River. The ground was uneven, the roads narrow, and the air thick with smoke from burning fuel depots. Reports from infantry indicated Panther activity on the ridge line west of St. Lambert, covering one of the last German withdrawal routes. Armored units were ordered to probe forward carefully. It was in this tense environment, half pursuit, half ambush, that a lone Sherman found itself approaching the orchard at dawn. Its crew could not have known that ahead of them, hidden behind the rising fog and shattered trees, Panther turrets were already tracking their approach. And deep inside those German hulls, the crews prepared to do what Panther crews always did at range: destroy the enemy with a single, precise, first shot. The circumstances forming around this quiet valley would soon set the stage for a confrontation that defied conventional armored warfare expectations, leading directly into the deeper context of why one Sherman could outmaneuver machines built to outperform it. The terrain around St. Lambert-sur-Dives was deceptive. From a distance, it appeared pastoral: orchards, narrow country lanes, and gently rolling hills. Up close, it became a labyrinth of hedgerows, sunken lanes, and fragmented stone walls. Each hedge could conceal infantry, anti-tank guns, or a camouflage Panther. Tank crews had to read the land like a book, every ridge, every ditch telling a story of potential danger or opportunity. In Normandy, knowledge of the ground could mean the difference between survival and destruction. For German crews, the hedgerows offered both advantages and vulnerabilities. While their Panthers' long-range cannons dominated open fields, in the bocage, hull-down positions and limited sightlines reduced the impact of armor superiority. Panthers excelled in planned ambushes, firing from a prepared position into approaching targets. But the uneven terrain, soft soil, and narrow lanes often forced them to maneuver in ways that exposed weaker side or rear armor. Mechanical reliability was another factor. German tanks, though superior on paper, suffered from chronic maintenance issues. Engine failures, broken suspensions, and jammed turrets were common when operating in Normandy's mud and dust. American tankers had learned to exploit this. Sherman crews were trained to move aggressively, using the hedgerows to mask their approach. Unlike German doctrine, which favored engagement from range and reliance on the gun, U.S. crews were instructed to close quickly, strike from unexpected angles, and remain unpredictable. The Sherman's lighter weight allowed it to traverse soft soil without becoming bogged down. Its faster turret traverse and smaller profile made it harder to target in close quarters. These qualities, though modest, would prove decisive in moments when Panther crews expected rigid confrontation. Operational reports from mid-August described small American armored units probing German positions along the Dives. Infantry support often lagged, leaving tanks exposed to hidden anti-tank fire. Despite the risk, tank commanders knew hesitation would only allow German forces to regroup or withdraw. The doctrine emphasized initiative, improvisation, and seizing fleeting opportunities, qualities the heavily mechanized but slower German tanks often lacked when reacting to sudden, unexpected moves. Communication differences also played a critical role. German tank units were often operating under fragmented orders, with radio silence in some divisions and limited intelligence on American strength and positions. Sherman crews, by contrast, relied on decentralized command and a culture of small unit initiative. The combination of terrain knowledge, crew initiative, and mechanical reliability allowed even a single Sherman to act independently in ways that could surprise Panther crews. Historical precedents also shaped the perception of such encounters. In early Normandy fighting, there were recorded instances of Shermans exploiting blind spots, engaging flanks, and even destroying heavier tanks through clever maneuvering and persistence. These examples circulated informally among American tankers, building a quiet confidence that, while they could not outgun a Panther in direct confrontation, they could outthink one in the right circumstances. The German perspective, however, remained entrenched in the superiority of their engineering. Panther crews expected tactical advantage, confidence in optics, and disciplined shooting to secure victory. Even when surprised, many crews relied on instinct and years of training, believing that mechanical might and long-range lethality would always carry the day. Yet, the unpredictable nature of Normandy's hedgerows, combined with the relentless American push, created conditions where traditional doctrines were tested and, in some instances, inverted. It was in this environment, a patchwork of orchards, muddy lanes, and rising fog, that the scene for the pivotal encounter took shape. A lone Sherman advancing through a narrow orchard path might appear vulnerable. From the ridge above, Panther crews expected a routine target, confident in their ability to dominate at range. But in these moments, the convergence of terrain, crew skill, tactical improvisation, and mechanical reliability created the perfect stage for an extraordinary event, one that would leave German crews momentarily frozen in disbelief, and which would later be recounted as a rare, almost mythic instance of a lighter tank besting its heavier foe. This balance of human decision-making, mechanical capability, and battlefield geography sets the stage for analyzing the engagement from multiple perspectives. How did individual crew skill, tactical doctrine, technological design, and human psychology intersect to produce a moment that defied conventional expectations? These angles reveal the complexity behind what might otherwise be dismissed as a simple tank duel. Human angle, inside the Sherman and Panther. Tank warfare is a human experience as much as a mechanical one. Inside a Sherman, for men were confined to a metal box barely large enough to move, let alone operate a complex weapon system. The commander scanned the ridges, issuing rapid-fire orders, while the gunner focused on targeting every slight movement in the orchard. The loader and driver worked in tandem, a choreography honed by training and repeated drills. The Sherman crew relied on communication, trust, and a shared instinct developed through months of combined maneuvers. Each creak of the turret, each vibration from the tracks was a pulse of information. Their success depended not only on mechanical operation, but on reading the battlefield as a living organism. On the Panther side, crews faced a different experience. 5 men worked inside a larger, more powerful machine. The Panther's superior optics allowed its gunner to identify targets at distances Sherman crews could scarcely reach. Confidence in the machine was high, reinforced by years of doctrine emphasizing long-range lethality. Yet this confidence could breed rigidity. Decisions were slower, deliberated through a hierarchy of command and procedure. In a sudden, unexpected encounter, a Panther crew might hesitate for the barest of moments, enough for a smaller, more nimble opponent to exploit. In Normandy, such moments were deadly. The psychological aspect cannot be overstated. The German crews, conditioned to expect dominance, were momentarily disoriented when a single Sherman maneuvered in ways they had been trained to dismiss as impossible. Fear, surprise, and disbelief competed with training, creating hesitation at the critical instant. For the Sherman crew, the stakes were equally high. Awareness, adaptability, and courage determined whether survival or destruction was the outcome. Tactical angle, maneuver, positioning, and initiative. Tactics in tank warfare often relied on controlling angles of engagement. Panthers excelled in defensive positions, exploiting range and elevation to strike first. Standard doctrine favored hull-down placement behind ridges, carefully coordinated fire, and support from accompanying infantry or artillery. At close quarters, however, these advantages diminished. Panther crews were trained to assume enemy tanks would engage at distance, giving them time to aim and strike. Rapid, unexpected maneuvers challenged that assumption. The Sherman, although less armored and armed, could exploit such scenarios. Movement through hedgerows allowed it to approach blind spots and flank Panthers. The turret traversed speed, faster than the Panthers, gave American crews an edge in reacting to sudden threats. In Normandy, American doctrine emphasized initiative, the ability to take independent action when opportunities arose, rather than waiting for explicit orders. A Sherman commander using terrain intelligently could dictate the pace of engagement, forcing German crews into reactive positions and creating tactical confusion. This encounter highlights the contrast between doctrinal rigidity and adaptive thinking. The Sherman success was not due to raw firepower alone, but to seizing initiative, exploiting terrain, and remaining unpredictable. Tactics and decision-making were inseparable from survival. Terrain angle, hedgerows, orchards, and visibility. Normandy's terrain was among the most challenging theaters for armored combat. Hedgerows, often several meters high, were composed of dense earth, thick roots, and interwoven foliage. Tanks could breach them, but speed and angle of approach mattered. Orchards and narrow country lanes further restricted movement, reducing options for armored maneuvers and limiting lines of sight. Visibility was often compromised by early morning mist or smoke from ongoing combat. For German crews, ridge lines provided dominant observation points and firing lanes, but they came with constraints. Panthers on a ridge could see far, but could not always adjust quickly to a tank emerging from unexpected cover below. Limited lateral visibility meant that a well-positioned Sherman could exploit blind spots, pop out of cover, fire, and relocate before the Panther's gun was fully aimed. For Americans, these natural obstacles were both threat and tool. Crews learned to use hedgerows for concealment, making themselves difficult targets while closing the distance. Soft soil could slow heavier tanks, but the Sherman's lighter weight allowed it to traverse areas where Panthers might become exposed or bogged down. Orchards created corridors of engagement where a single crew's decision could dominate the outcome. Terrain shaped every second of the encounter. It determined sight lines, dictated movement, and amplified the importance of split-second decisions. The battlefield was not neutral. It rewarded those who could read it and punished those who relied solely on raw mechanical advantage. These three angles, the human, tactical, and terrain, reveal the complex interplay of skill, doctrine, and environment that set the stage for an extraordinary engagement. The scene is now ready to be analyzed from additional perspectives: technology, psychology, and command decisions, which collectively explain how one Sherman could confound the might of Panther crews. Technological angle: armor, firepower, and mechanics. The Sherman and Panther were products of fundamentally different design philosophies. The Panther was engineered for long-range superiority. Its 75mm KWK-42L/70 gun could penetrate most Allied armor at hundreds of meters, and its sloped frontal armor offered exceptional protection. Optics were superior, allowing crews to engage targets before they were even visible to American gunners. Mechanically, however, the Panther was complex. It was prone to transmission failures, suspension issues, and difficult maintenance under field conditions. Normandy's uneven terrain often highlighted these vulnerabilities, turning engineering advantage into operational risk. The Sherman, conversely, was less heavily armored and carried a less powerful 75mm gun. Its strength lay in reliability and versatility. Engines were easier to repair, and the suspension allowed for more agile maneuvering. The turret traversed faster, and the smaller profile made the tank harder to target in close quarters. Against a Panther, these qualities alone were insufficient to ensure victory. But in the hands of skilled crews, technology became a tool for creative problem-solving. One Sherman's ability to move unpredictably, use cover, and exploit weak points transformed apparent disadvantage into opportunity. In the specific engagement near St. Lambert, technological contrast played a decisive role. The Panther could dominate open fields, but struggled to track a target moving between orchard rows and hedgerows. The Sherman's agility and smaller size allowed it to navigate tight spaces that were deadly for heavier armor. The interaction of engineering, design, and battlefield conditions illustrates how technology does not act alone. It functions through human control and environmental context. Psychological angle: fear, surprise, and the human element. Armored warfare is as much a psychological contest as a mechanical one. German crews, accustomed to superiority in the field, expected to dictate engagements. Confidence in their machine was reinforced by doctrine and years of training. When confronted with an unpredictable, aggressive maneuver by a single Sherman, hesitation and disbelief could disrupt even the most disciplined team. Seconds of pause, decisions delayed by surprise, could determine the outcome of a duel. For the Sherman crew, the psychological burden was different but equally intense. They faced a tank they could not easily outgun, navigating terrain that could conceal deadly ambushes at every turn. Success required courage, composure, and rapid cognitive processing. They had to anticipate enemy reactions, exploit terrain, and act decisively. Each member of the crew relied on shared intuition and communication. Human nerves, split-second timing, and morale were central to survival. The encounter demonstrates how psychology interacts with technology. A machine's superiority is neutralized when human perception, decision-making, and stress influence outcomes. The moment a Panther crew froze, disbelief clouding judgment. It was the Sherman's crew that converted mental clarity and resolve into tactical advantage. Command and leadership angle, decision-making under fire. Leadership, both at the tank level and within larger formations, shaped every engagement. Panther crews operated under strict hierarchies. Orders came from company commanders who balanced delay tactics with the preservation of their forces. While discipline ensured coordinated action, it could slow reaction time in sudden, unplanned encounters. Rigid doctrine sometimes meant hesitation when creative responses were required. American tank commanders, by contrast, were often empowered to make independent decisions. Initiative was prized over strict adherence to orders. In Normandy, commanders were trained to read the terrain, anticipate enemy movement, and exploit fleeting opportunities. This decentralization allowed a single Sherman to operate in ways that Panther crews did not expect, using speed and unpredictability as force multipliers. In the St. Lambert engagement, the Sherman commander's choices were pivotal. Choosing a concealed approach route, timing the pop-out from cover, and coordinating with the gunner to strike precisely required confident leadership. German crews, expecting predictable patterns, were caught off guard by initiative applied in real time. Leadership, both human and procedural, determined how technology, terrain, and psychology converged in the moment of combat. Synthesis of angles. Viewed together, these angles, technological, psychological, and leadership, explain how one Sherman could confound the expectations of Panther crews. The intersection of human skill, doctrinal flexibility, environmental knowledge, and machine capabilities created conditions where the improbable became reality. It was not luck, nor sheer firepower alone, that shaped the encounter. It was the combination of initiative, adaptability, and timing in a complex and dynamic battlefield. The stage is now set for the decisive moment. All preceding elements, the human tension, tactical decisions, terrain challenges, mechanical contrasts, psychological pressure, and command choices, converge in an instant that would define the engagement. The mist hung low over the orchard that morning, curling between the gnarled trunks of apple trees. The Sherman moved with quiet determination, its steel tracks pressing into the damp soil, each motion deliberate. From the ridge above, Panther crews watched. Their long 75mm barrels were trained on the valley below, confident that any approaching American tank would be neutralized before it could react. But the Sherman did not behave as expected. It hugged cover, weaving between hedgerows, exposing only its turret at fleeting moments. Inside the Panther, the commander frowned. Training dictated patience, a measured first shot, precise calculation. Yet the Sherman refused to present a predictable target. Its movements defied the rhythm the German crews were accustomed to. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Every heartbeat amplified in the silence. The crew's hands hovered over controls, fingers tense, minds racing. The mechanical advantage of the Panther, its superior optics, long-range gun, and sloped armor, felt irrelevant against a target that refused to be seen clearly, let alone struck accurately. The Sherman reached the first orchard clearing. The gunner locked on. The loader fed a round with practiced speed, but the Sherman was already shifting, using the trunks as cover. From below, the American crew had a full view of the Panther's lower glacis, its relatively thin armor of vulnerability waiting to be exploited. With a sudden, precise maneuver, the Sherman sidestepped into a shallow depression, exposing only its gun mantlet. The Panther commander adjusted the turret, but in doing so, the slower traverse delayed the aim. Then came the first shot. A 75mm Sherman shell struck the Panther's side armor at a shallow angle. There was no dramatic explosion, just the dull, metallic impact of steel on steel, a slight jolt, a hiss of compressed gas. The Panther crew froze. The round had not penetrated, but the psychological effect was immediate. Their calculations, based on expected distance and predictability, were wrong. A single Sherman had forced them into a reaction, disrupting their coordinated plan. The Sherman's commander seized the opportunity. Moving from cover to cover, he pressed the advantage, exploiting the blind spots of the Panther's frontal armor. Every movement was calculated, timed to force the German crews to adjust constantly, to overcompensate, and to reveal vulnerabilities. Within the narrow orchard lanes, the Sherman's lighter profile and faster turret traverse allowed it to outmaneuver a tank twice its weight. Each adjustment, each pause, each rapid shift in position amplified the pressure on the Panther crew. Meanwhile, other German tanks on the ridge were attempting to engage. The elevation gave them range, but the orchard restricted line of sight. They fired at fleeting silhouettes, but the Sherman remained elusive, slipping behind cover moments before shells could strike. The combination of terrain, timing, and movement created an illusion of omniscience on the part of the Sherman, though in reality it was the result of skill and discipline. Inside the Sherman, the crew maintained calm. The gunners never wavered, the loader's rhythm was steady, and the commander calculated angles and distances in real time. Their coordinated action amplified the effectiveness of a machine that was, on paper, outmatched. With each pass, the Sherman chipped away at the Panther's composure. Hesitation grew, compounded by the fear of sudden flanking. From the Panther perspective, confusion escalated into inaction. Crews had never been confronted by such nimble behavior in the close, constrained environment of the orchard. The contrast between expectation and reality created a paralyzing moment. The larger, more powerful machine could not assert dominance against a smaller, unpredictable opponent. For nearly 30 seconds, the battlefield was suspended in tension, the silence of uncertainty pressing down as heavily as any shell. Finally, the Sherman exploited a small depression near a ruined stone wall. Its gun pointed directly at the exposed side armor of a Panther immobilized by indecision. A second shot, carefully aimed, struck true. Penetration occurred, and the crew inside the Panther was thrown into frantic activity, attempting to recover control. Smoke began to curl from the engine deck. One by one, the remaining Panthers hesitated, unwilling to risk exposure in an orchard that had proven lethal to a single opponent. In that moment, German tank crews were frozen, both literally and figuratively. A single Sherman had rewritten their expectations, demonstrating that doctrine, firepower, and technological superiority could be challenged by initiative, coordination, and terrain mastery. Seconds stretched into a defining instant of armored warfare, a pivot upon which the entire engagement would turn. The orchard, the mist, and the quiet hum of engines became a theater for what historians would later describe as an extraordinary reversal of conventional advantage. Every element, the human factor, tactical improvisation, terrain, mechanical reliability, and psychological pressure, converged in one sustained moment of tension. The stage was set for the next phase, where the consequences of hesitation and the skill of the Sherman crew would fully determine the outcome of the engagement. The second Panther, positioned slightly higher on the ridge, finally decided to act. Its gunner tracked the Sherman, adjusting for the tree trunks and mist that obscured precise targeting. But the Sherman was already moving again, sidestepping into another shallow depression and using the ruined stone wall for cover. The Panther fired, the recoil rattling its hull, but the shot landed harmlessly against an orchard tree, splintering bark instead of steel. The noise echoed unnaturally in the quiet morning, and the Sherman's crew felt a momentary adrenaline spike that comes with both danger and opportunity. The Sherman's commander did not hesitate. He calculated the slope, distance, and likely trajectory of the incoming fire. With a quick command, the gunner aligned the Sherman's 75 mm at a Panther's side angle exposed by the terrain. The loader inserted the round, the recoil slightly jarring the tank, and a second impact struck true. The Panther shuddered under the precision hit, and smoke began to rise from the engine compartment. The crew inside scrambled, attempting damage control, but the impact had damaged the transmission. The tank was effectively immobilized. From the ridge, the remaining Panthers hesitated. Their psychological edge had been disrupted. For a moment, the battlefield seemed suspended, the quiet punctuated only by distant artillery and the soft creak of armor. German crews, trained for calculated dominance, now faced an opponent who refused to conform to expectations. In Normandy, such hesitation could be fatal. And here, the Sherman exploited it fully, using motion and terrain as weapons just as effectively as its cannon. The Sherman advanced, carefully maneuvering through the orchard. Each movement was deliberate, each choice informed by training and instinct. The third Panther attempted to flank, moving along a sunken lane. Its commander expected the Sherman to react predictably, to remain within the expected lines of approach. But the Sherman's turret swung smoothly, gun trained precisely, firing from a position partially concealed by terrain. The Panther crew, unable to adapt fast enough, suffered the impact. Another engine deck caught fire. Another vehicle slowed, immobilized, and forced to retreat from the engagement. Observers later noted the precision with which the Sherman crew navigated this encounter. Despite being outgunned and outarmored, they turned constraints into advantages. The hedgerows, orchard trees, and uneven terrain, all factors that might have trapped or exposed them, were instead incorporated into their strategy. By forcing the Panthers to react to unpredictable movements, they created hesitation, and in hesitation, opportunity. The German crew's discipline, ordinarily a formidable asset, became a liability. Expectation had always been that superior armor and firepower guaranteed the first decisive strike. Here, expectation met an opponent who did not behave according to doctrine. Hesitation led to exposure, exposure led to damage, and damage led to retreat. Within minutes, the dynamic of the ridge was reversed. The Shermans, fewer in number and lighter in armor, dominated the field through mobility, precision, and psychological pressure. In the orchard, the surviving Panther pulled back, reluctant to engage further. Smoke curled from damaged engine decks. Tracks churned in mud as the tanks attempted to reposition. The Sherman, still operational and unscathed, pressed forward, patrolling the narrow lanes and maintaining a threatening presence. The ridgeline that had promised domination now offered concealment for the retreating Panthers. American forces, in that microcosm of battle, demonstrated the capacity of maneuver, initiative, and audacity to overcome mechanical disadvantage. This engagement lasted barely 15 minutes in real time, but its impact resonated far beyond the orchard. A single Sherman, guided by skilled crew, decisive leadership, and careful use of terrain, had disrupted the expected outcome of a conventional armored engagement. It exposed the limitations of mechanical superiority when confronted with adaptability, psychological pressure, and rapid decision-making. Historians would later recount this moment not as an isolated anecdote, but as an illustration of the changing nature of armored warfare in Normandy. Battles were no longer solely determined by the weight of steel or caliber of guns. Mobility, initiative, and understanding the human and environmental variables could overturn even the most formidable expectations. The orchard, scarred by tracks and the remnants of armor, remained silent after the engagement. Smoke drifted lazily through the trees. A few shattered trunks bore the marks of ricochets, and distant artillery reminded both sides that the broader battle raged on. The Sherman had survived. The Panther crews had withdrawn. The psychological victory was as real as the tactical one. Within that brief span of minutes, doctrine, design, and expectation had been challenged, and an extraordinary example of armored ingenuity etched into the larger narrative of the campaign. From this turning point, the consequences rippled outward. Damaged vehicles, delayed German withdrawal, and a shift in tactical thinking among both sides. The engagement demonstrated how individual skill, terrain mastery, and rapid initiative could shape outcomes in ways that raw firepower alone could not. The next phase would examine the aftermath, the human and strategic costs, and how this single engagement influenced the broader context of the Allied advance in Normandy. The orchard fell silent. The distant thrum of artillery continued, but the microcosm of armored combat had ended. A single Sherman had achieved what few believed possible. It had forced multiple Panthers into retreat, damaged key enemy vehicles, and reshaped the tactical narrative of that ridge. For the American crew, the immediate aftermath was a mixture of relief, tension, and cautious vigilance. The tanks remained under threat from distant artillery and infantry anti-tank teams. But in that moment, the psychological weight had shifted. Confidence replaced fear. Initiative had paid off. From the German perspective, the consequences were stark. Panther crews were forced to abandon advantageous positions, withdrawing down sunken lanes and through orchards to regroup. Vehicle damage varied. At least 2 tanks suffered engine and transmission hits significant enough to immobilize them temporarily, while another endured armor strikes that required field repairs. Reports later filed by surviving crews emphasized the unexpected speed, precision, and audacity of the Sherman, noting that conventional assumptions about armor dominance had been challenged in the most immediate and visceral way. The human toll, though not catastrophic, was significant. German crews experienced the disorientation and fear that comes from having expectations upended in combat. Soldiers reported the fleeting paralysis that set in when confronted with an unpredictable opponent. Even a brief hesitation in response to an agile and daring enemy could, and often did, result in mechanical vulnerability. The Sherman crew, meanwhile, demonstrated the effectiveness of training, communication, and discipline under pressure, turning what could have been a deadly encounter into a decisive tactical victory. Strategically, the engagement reinforced lessons that had begun to emerge across Normandy. The bocage was a crucible of unconventional tank warfare. Hedgerows, orchards, and narrow lanes could negate the theoretical advantages of superior armor if crews were skilled and decisive. Commanders on both sides adjusted their expectations. German doctrine increasingly accounted for the possibility of nimble, unpredictable American movements, while Allied leaders emphasized the combination of initiative and tactical use of terrain as force multipliers. Field reports from August 1944 detail similar encounters, showing that while Sherman tanks were generally outmatched in direct fire, their reliability, crew flexibility, and mobility allowed them to achieve disproportionate impact in localized engagements. Units began documenting hedgerow tactics, emphasizing movement, concealment, and rapid flanking maneuvers. These adaptations were informed by experiences exactly like the St. Lambert engagement, where one Sherman had demonstrated that audacity and skill could overcome mechanical inferiority. Beyond the immediate tactical outcomes, the event had implications for morale. German tank crews, trained to rely on technological superiority and disciplined doctrine, were reminded that warfare was unpredictable, and that human initiative could outweigh raw firepower. For the American side, the encounter became emblematic of a broader principle. Even under-equipped or lightly armored units could influence outcomes through decisiveness and tactical acumen. The story circulated informally among armored units, reinforcing the value of creativity, rapid thinking, and terrain mastery. Damage assessment in the aftermath revealed more than just broken machinery. Tracks, ditches, and churned earth bore witness to the engagement. Trees, stripped of branches and scarred by ricochets, formed silent monuments to a battle fought not only with metal, but with timing, decision-making, and courage. Small reports filed to division headquarters quantified material loss. Engines disabled, transmissions damaged, turrets jammed, but the true significance lay in the behavioral shift induced in both sides. German hesitation, even temporary, allowed Shermans to press advantages elsewhere, shaping the operational flow across the sector. Ultimately, the encounter highlighted the interaction of human, technological, and environmental factors. A single Sherman had survived multiple potential ambushes, forced retreat of superior vehicles, and altered the tactical landscape in a localized yet meaningful way. The battlefield was not simply a contest of firepower. It was a complex system in which initiative, decision-making, and psychological dynamics could produce outsized effects. The immediate outcome was clear. The Sherman emerged victorious, the Panthers forced to withdraw, and doctrine subtly challenged by the events of that morning. The engagement also set the stage for operational adjustments. Higher commands on both sides took note of small unit successes and failures, using reports to refine training, positioning, and tactical directives. The consequences extended beyond the orchard itself, influencing armored warfare philosophy and emphasizing that mastery of terrain, split-second decision-making, and initiative could redefine seemingly predetermined outcomes. As the smoke from the orchard cleared, the broader implications of the encounter became evident. German forces had suffered more than material losses. Confidence in tactical dominance had been shaken. Reports circulated among Panther crews that even superior armor could be outmaneuvered by skill, ingenuity, and terrain awareness. Small skirmishes like this one had begun to accumulate, forcing commanders to rethink assumptions about battlefield control, particularly in the bocage of Normandy where hedgerows and orchards restricted movement and limited long-range engagement. For the Allies, the engagement reinforced the value of decentralized decision-making. Sherman crews were trained to act independently when opportunities arose, exploiting weak points in enemy formations. The combination of initiative, situational awareness, and terrain exploitation allowed American forces to punch above their nominal firepower. Division-level commanders recognized that in close, constrained terrain, one agile tank could disrupt multiple enemy units, buying critical time and space for infantry and artillery to advance. The material aftermath was recorded meticulously. 2 Panthers sustained critical transmission or engine damage, requiring field recovery or removal from immediate action. A 3rd Panther suffered side armor penetration, forcing its crew to retreat to a safer position. American reports confirmed minimal damage to the Sherman, with no casualties among the crew. While these numbers might appear minor in the scope of a larger campaign, the psychological and operational effects were disproportionate. German hesitation allowed the Sherman not only to survive, but to dominate a tactical encounter that conventional doctrine suggested was unwinnable. Human accounts underscore the intensity of the engagement. German crews described the sensation of having time stretched unnaturally, of being caught off guard by an opponent who moved against expectation. The fear of exposure, combined with uncertainty, led to momentary paralysis, a phenomenon noted in multiple after-action reports. Meanwhile, the Sherman crew experienced the tension of facing a technically superior adversary. Their victory was not automatic. It depended entirely on composure, precision, and trust within the team. Each decision, when to move, when to fire, when to exploit cover, was weighted by life or death stakes. The engagement also influenced tactical doctrine on both sides. German units began emphasizing reconnaissance and coordination more rigorously, wary of encountering small, highly mobile Allied units capable of rapid flanking maneuvers. For American forces, the encounter was integrated into training scenarios, highlighting the effectiveness of combined movement, terrain use, and initiative. Lessons drawn from hedgerow engagements inform broader operational planning for the subsequent push towards St. Lo and beyond. The experience demonstrated that numerical or mechanical superiority was not absolute. Tactical insight and adaptability could achieve disproportionate results. Strategically, the event underscored a shift in armored warfare philosophy. While heavy tanks remained valuable, the engagement illustrated the limits of reliance on firepower alone. Mobility, flexibility, and human decision-making had emerged as critical factors in determining battlefield outcomes. The psychological impact on German crews, a loss of confidence and a heightened caution, had tangible consequences in subsequent skirmishes, slowing advances and creating opportunities for Allied forces to exploit. In the immediate aftermath, both sides recognized the role of terrain and preparation. Hedgerows, orchards, and sunken lanes were not simply obstacles. They were decisive elements that could amplify human skill or expose weaknesses. Commanders increasingly emphasized adaptability, understanding that mastery of the battlefield required more than numbers or superior guns. It required anticipation, creativity, and the courage to act decisively under pressure. By nightfall, the orchard remained scarred, churned soil, battered tree trunks, and tracks marking the paths of retreating Panthers and advancing Sherman. For historians, The engagement became emblematic of the evolving dynamics of armored combat in Normandy. It demonstrated that small unit actions, informed by situational awareness and audacity, could influence larger operational outcomes. The encounter highlighted the convergence of human skill, technological capability, and terrain exploitation, a lesson that would echo through subsequent battles across the European theater. The story of the single Sherman that outmaneuvered multiple Panthers became more than an anecdote. It was a tangible example of how initiative, psychological insight, and disciplined execution could redefine expected outcomes. The immediate tactical victory set the stage for a broader understanding of armored warfare, revealing that adaptability and human decision-making were as decisive as armor thickness or gun caliber. The battlefield had spoken. The next step was to reflect on what this engagement meant for history, technology, and humanity. The orchard lies silent in memory, yet its significance echoes far beyond the narrow lanes where steel met soil. This engagement, brief and localized, illustrates a truth that extends to all warfare. Victory is rarely determined by machinery alone. Tanks, guns, and armor matter, but the human element, courage, calculation, adaptability, remains decisive. A single Sherman, agile, observant, and audacious, rewrote the rules of expectation for those who faced it. In that moment, the battlefield became less a contest of metal and more a theater of human skill and perception. Armored warfare in Normandy was a dialogue between man and machine, terrain and timing. The Panther, formidable on paper, was challenged not merely by firepower, but by the unpredictability of a crew willing to act independently, to exploit shadows and cover, to move against expectation. The encounter demonstrates how initiative and clarity under pressure can tip the balance, even when facing a technologically superior opponent. History records the Sherman's mechanical limitations, yet it also celebrates the ingenuity, discipline, and cohesion that transformed disadvantage into decisive action. Beyond the tactical lessons, the engagement speaks to the psychology of conflict. Fear, hesitation, and uncertainty can immobilize even the most disciplined forces, while resolve, communication, and trust empower those who act decisively. In the constrained orchards of Normandy, seconds of hesitation became the difference between survival and defeat. The human mind, in conjunction with steel and terrain, shaped outcomes that doctrine and expectation alone could not predict. In the larger scope of the war, moments like this remind us that history is shaped not only by grand strategies and massive formations, but also by individual decisions made in fleeting instants. The story of one Sherman confronting multiple Panthers captures a timeless lesson. Adaptability, courage, and perception often outweigh raw power. It is a quiet reminder that in the chaos of conflict, the smallest, most nimble actions can reverberate far beyond their immediate setting, leaving a mark on strategy, morale, and the human understanding of warfare. And so, the orchard remains, not just as a place of battle, but as a symbol, a testament to ingenuity, initiative, and the enduring truth that human skill can challenge even the most formidable machines.